Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of Hands-on Agile 2025. I'm glad you're here. Today, we have an exciting guest for another Q&A round. And by the way, thank everyone for all the work you put in there, because I have a nice list of questions from you. And let's see how many we can actually answer with Petra's help. So Petra Wille is going to be our guest today. You may know her from hosting Product at Parks. She's also an established author, and she just managed
Disappeared?
to
No.
publish the first session of her podcast. So it'll be awesome by all means. So what are we going to talk about? We will talk about a whole variety of topics, like product leadership, of course. I mean, Petra is one of the well-known product leadership coaches out there. Of course, we will talk about the product operating model. Is this the new thing, the new kid on the block? Is this somehow related to Agile? What it's all about? And of course, we may dabble with the idea to talk about how to build actually strong product cultures in companies, which always is a nice topic. Petra, welcome.
Good morning, everybody, or I assume it's morning for everybody, but maybe it's not. So welcome people all around the globe.
Okay, so shall we move right in? Because I have about
Please, I'm so ready.
15 questions, so shouldn't be that much of a problem. Okay.
I tend to do long answers.
That's okay.
But let's
That's
see.
okay. That's the better version than the other way around.
And by the way, Stefan, are we taking follow-up questions from the audience?
Okay,
that would be cool, maybe. So yes, Gunnar is already excited. So yeah, let's do that. If the group is so small, I think we can really make it a bit of a discussion.
Yeah. Totally. I'm with you.
Yeah. Cool.
So I would love to start with a topic dear to my heart, which is product leadership in the age of AI. How do you see AI transforming the role of product leaders? So are there specific skills required to actually excel at this, or is it necessary to go back to school and actually learn more about these things? Do we have to feel that we will be substituted sooner or later? What is your take on the whole big picture of AI and product leadership?
A philosophical question first. I love that. So I first define the term product leadership from my end and ask you what you meant by it. Because for me, so I try to use product management and product leadership in the way that product leadership is addressing the people that leading the product organization and managing product people. I know some companies are doing this differently. But if you use the term product leader for basically every product person, then I'm not sure what I should be referring to when I want to talk about their line managers. So that's why I, in my literature, decided product leadership is reserved for the people running the product organization. And product management is basically for all IC level people. And I know some companies have product managers, product owners. So that's all product management in my head when I talk about it. So just that people are not confused about me talking about product leadership, that is people managing the organization. Was that what you were referring to in your AI question? Okay. So given you in a product leadership role and are more working on the product ecosystem and making sure that your teams can succeed in building the actual products, then I think the biggest challenge right now is to identify real use cases where AI could be helping your company and organization to strive and to succeed, and kind of reducing some of the noise that currently does happen. I know that a lot of companies and product leaders do have this challenge that basically the advisory board says there is nothing with AI on the roadmap. Can you just ditch the roadmap and paint AI all over it? So that is what I hear from at least many of my coaches, even in really big organizations where really entire roadmap plannings have been ditched. Product teams have been tasked by there's not enough AI in your roadmap. And usually the discussion is there needs to be 20% of all the stuff you do working on AI stuff, or 50% or something like that. And then product leaders oftentimes face this challenge of frankly speaking, other than automizing some of the stuff that we were about to automate anyways, just now with different models and talking about AI, other than that, I don't see real business cases in our organization. So customer care, customer support oftentimes is the first thing that everybody is looking into and looking at, because the chatbots there, if you do it right, could be really powerful already. Stefan, you and I sometimes behind the scenes are playing around with the Petra chatbot. And so far, I have not succeeded to create one that I actually love, despite the fact that I use 20 tools for it already. So it still is giving false advice, I'd say, whenever I use it. And I have tons of materials that I can feed into such an AI, right? So I can train it with all my books and all my blog posts and all the newsletters that I wrote. So I think for a computer system, it is pretty obvious what my take is on product management with all these data. But still, the advice that comes out is oftentimes what we call classic AI hallucination. So it's tricky as a product leader right now to strike this balance between, I know I need to write AI on some of my slide decks, and on the other hand, I really would like to find use cases where it does make sense to use AI. Many coaching conversations, they find that using external models is not the way to go. So they start to use smaller models inside of the organization. So that is a big discussion right now. So what is the appropriate use of it? Do we want to own the stuff? Are we fine with other organizations owning all the content that we feed into there? Yesterday, I've been at Novo Nordisk, pharma company, big regulatory environment there. And they really struggle with Microsoft kind of sprinkling their AI tools on everything they do in a company of that kind of a security level. And it's not so easy, even that they're a big customer of Microsoft and have good connections, to get rid of a lot of these new AI assistant tools and stuff like that. So these are practical internal challenges that organizations are having right now with this really fast paced rollout. And then answering this part, Stefan, with are all of us being obsolete anytime soon? In short, I think if you're really worried that AI can automate what you do really quickly, then you were not doing the entire product management stack, I'd say, because it's so much connections and collaboration, and it's human interactions, and it's being having a lot of empathy for your colleagues and all these kind of things, having empathy for the user. That's definitely something that AI will not automate anytime soon. Will it help us, and will we hopefully leverage it for the rather boring stuff? So some of my clients really found nice use cases where AI can help surface user research findings from the past, and not that it does a lot of aggregation, but it, for example, just like does a lot of digging and searching and surfacing patterns and stuff like that, and say like, hey, there might be an interesting pattern, the user research you conducted a year ago by another team. Maybe you want to watch the video, and then people still, I'm convinced of, need to watch the video and take their conclusions about what they see and what people were struggling with and the questions that a human being was having. But the surfacing, this aggregation, this bubbling up, this reuse of user research, for example, is currently a use case that I see working. And some of these parts will be automated, which hopefully makes our lives easier and not obsolete anytime soon. But I don't know. Nobody knows right now, right? In 2 years from now, we might be at an entirely different space.
Already answered another question, which role do you think AI will play in fostering better product discovery practices?
So there was I forgot to bookmark it, but somebody published a study. So they tried to create personas for the work that they did. And they found that it was so heavily biased, all these personas. So they first created it, and somebody from the team stated, but they are not super diverse personas, so maybe we should diversify the personas a bit. And that's basically what they asked the AI to do. And what the AI was, they painted all the persona pictures basically black, so it was all kind of people of color on the persona pictures, but all the personality traits remained like super white. personality traits. It was kind of the most ridiculous thing. So all the things that are important and core and integral parts of user research, I would still advise people to do that yourself. So the actual work needs to be done by humans. But as said, like the grouping, the digging out past user research, surfacing patterns, all of that is what I think AI can really already helping us with. And there are more and more tools that are tailored to this particular use case, and those are the even better ones than the usual ChatGPT.
Still thrilled of the idea that I can just throw 56 hours of user interview recording somewhere, and they surface patterns. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And then you still can go back to the snippets, because that's what the cool tools do. They just like say, okay, watch minute 3.3 to 3.50, and then you get exactly what the person was saying. So I would not skip that step. I think you still need to see the human being struggling with what you build. But at least you don't have to watch all the video in its entirety, because we know in the beginning there's the intro part and all this kind of thing. You can skip all of that. So I think it will be a big time saver if used correctly.
Pattern X is mentioned in videos 12,
Yes,
14, 18,
exactly.
and 26, and
Yeah.
here are the snippets.
Exactly.
I cut them together into one clip.
Yes, that's what
click
they do
here.
as well, these tools.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so that's
Highlight
would be
clips and stuff.
would be a good approach. AI is enabling a lot of possibilities on the data side, consuming huge amounts of data and actually identifying patterns at a level that the mere humans basically are not built to do. The question is, when do we run into a over-reliance on these techniques? Does it mean that we will move back into data-driven decisions? Probably, because of the over-reliance on technology. And how can we assure that the qualitative part of the equation still has sufficient support within the decision model that we have?
I actually see the opposite. So at least at some of my clients, quantitative user research now gets used more because of aggregation and pattern finding becoming easier. Before that, and it's not ideal and not a setup that I would promote, but I see it a lot out there in the wilderness, is that you have a UX team and they do the research for all the other teams, right? And so often the perception of what the user actually does, where they struggle, where their pain points are, does live in the heads of, I don't know, 4 or 5 people mainly. Do they debrief the product teams? Of course. Otherwise, they couldn't work it. But the gap between the developer and the actual user is big in these organizations, right? Because the developer is to some extent shielded from a product person, and the product person is to some extent is shielded by the user research team that does centralized user research. So there is already a big gap in between. And with the companies that are using these new AI tools to aggregate user research, this gap can be smaller, even if the user research team still conducts the user research. So developers have it way easier to dig out some of the findings and stuff like that. So that's, for example, something that I like to see. So it becomes easier to use the qualitative stuff. Sorry, brain, morning. And the qualitative stuff is still something that people have on dashboards anyways in companies that are good in tracking their progress. But let's face it, on the other hand, not all companies yet are good in tracking progress of whatever they build. So I still find this in many companies that it's kind of fire and forget. So people build stuff, people release stuff, people build new stuff and release stuff without any validation of the impact of the stuff that they worked on. And as long as that is the case, I'm not so much worried about AI interfering with the process, right? So it's still, companies still have so much basic homework to do. And AI won't help with that. It will be actually more harmful in these kind of environments. But on the other hand, I have some junior product leaders in coaching as well. And they really struggle to, for the first time, create OKRs or a KPI tree and learn about how they could measure the success of what they currently build. And having AI and ChatGPT for brainstorming reasons does help them to think out loud what could be the main driver that they track and the outcomes that they optimize for and stuff like that. So as always, there are great use cases for it, and then there are the use cases that are not so amazing. And yeah, I see qualitative data coming and bubbling up more in organizations than before because of AI. So it's actually a good message, at least for now, I'd say.
You mentioned an interesting point, this narrowing the gap between the UX folks and the developers by applying AI. And in this respect, isn't this just putting ointment on an issue that you should directly address?
Yeah, as always. There's by the way, an amazing talk from Henrik Nieberg about that topic from Mind the Product in the Barbican, I don't know, 2019 or something, or 2018, where he talked about this exact topic. So how to bridge this gap between the end user and the developer. And that's what I often have as a mental model. So I want the tech team to be able to invent on behalf of the user. Because what I don't want them to do is observe what the problem is and then just solve this friction in the system by adding another checkbox or something like that. But if you have a really talented team of developers, I think they would love to see more with what the people are actually really struggling. Then they know the technology way better than any product person in the room. And then they can say like, hey, if I use this technology that we haven't used so far, this would solve the customer problem way better. And for that to happen, for this moment of, we could do this entirely different, Petra. You with your idea of putting it onto that page, we can do this. We can use an AI agent, for example, to solve that problem. It's more likely that the developers are having these ideas because they're playing way more with the technologies than we do in most cases. So that is why I often think we need to really expose them to the user and their struggles way more than we usually do. And is it time consuming to some extent? Yes, but we can streamline some of it with the help of AI, yada, yada, yada. And at least my personal experience is developers never push back on me asking them if they want to attend the usability test. So I even had a team that were entirely located in Polish. None of them was able to speak German. The prototype was in German. And even they attended and said like, yeah, but we know what we want to build. So we get what the prototype is all about and we get what the people say to some extent. So we get the context and we see them struggling. So even for them not speaking the language, it was valuable to see where the people struggled. So yeah, we don't want to involve them in organizing all of it and recruiting the participants maybe. So the logistics is maybe something somebody else can handle. But watching users struggle is definitely something that all the developers I've ever worked with find interesting.
Yeah, on my side. And by the way, this typical idea that developers suck at talking to customers completely since, so seriously, I always like to employ my developers as running active interviews, so with a bit of training, they actually are quite good at this.
Exactly. And it's basic interview training. It's something that can be done in an hour, basically.
Yes.
And then every team member can ask questions that are not
Yes.
massively loaded and biased, so that you get real user research results. But yeah, it's not super complex. All smart people. Yeah.
It's not rocket science. Absolutely not. Okay. So, I have a lot of different other questions on this big topic of AI. We could set up two LMMs and create two agents, and then they can play ping pong. One is asking the question, the other one is answering it, and then at the end we check the protocols. But I would like to move on to product operating model and agile because that's a big topic. I think for many people in the community. So as a Scrum trainer, I know a lot of people in the Scrum/Agile community. Let's say something along the line of, "Oh my goodness, we totally love Martin Erikson's model because this is actually how we would like to work. This is our ideal state of a Scrum team, for example, creating value for customers while contributing to the bottom line of the organization." Why does he hate us so much? So it's like being, pushed away, by the adult in the room that you would actually like to please as a child. last week or so, he wrote an article on this idea. Yeah, agile basically is just addressing one part of the equation. So it could be supporting delivery, but anything beyond that, strategy, discovery, therapy, it's completely useless for that. So what is your take on product operating model? How is that supposed to be understood? Is it just old wine in new bottles? Has that been around for decades?
Yeah, but that's what Marty says in the intro of his book. Basically, he says it's a write-up of what he learned in different backgrounds and different companies and different industries over the years. And he said, like, he didn't invent the term, which he didn't invent the term. He just used it for the book. And I can, from my own experience with the clients that I'm having, because what I do for years is helping companies transform towards exactly something that we now would call a product operating model. But before he was coining the term and making it so widely known, it was hard for the clients to describe what they actually want to do. Because the journey often was the following. The organizations at some point of time were not happy with the delivery process and how they came up with products. So they were not successful in that. And then usually what they stumbled upon was an agile transformation, because that is marketed and sold and branded by so many consultancies out there, all the way up to the ones that love safe. And if you come across those as an organization, then you're like, okay, this is it. So let's do this. This sounds like a much better way of working. And companies then, and I bet most of the people in the call have exactly that experience, then go all in and introducing agile on the team's level, the product development team's level. But oftentimes not the entire organization is starting to wrap their head around agile ways of working. So they focus on introducing a rather rigid, a more or less rigid framework, how they implement agile. So they usually pick Scrum, or they decide to go for Safe as said or something like that. And that's what they do on the team level. And I think that is what oftentimes people like Marty are not a fan of, because he says that's what he said in the article, right? Still, if you always go back to the Agile principles or the Agile manifesto with the context of where it comes from, this is still valid. And most of the people can always agree that that is a good idea. But if I talk to bigger corporate organizations and talk to their leadership, none of them has ever heard about the Agile principles or Agile ways of working. And I can see it in every meeting, because some have these meetings that are structured. There is an agenda, somebody is facilitating the meeting, and there is always this drive towards what are the tasks and who is doing them by when. And this is in more agile organizations, because everybody always has the task board in front of the head to some extent, and in all layers. It doesn't matter if you're in the HR department or if you're kind of talking to senior executives. They always have like, okay, we have open tasks, we do stuff, then stuff is done, then we look back if it was working, right? And they would do it with a strategy, they would do it with basically whatever. But this level of agile thinking being everywhere in the organization is rare, and usually only what I find in smaller to mid-sized organizations. And in these bigger corporate organizations, then they at some point end up with this, it's not only what we actually deliver that we need to think about more, it is also what we put into the funnel. So we're really bad in prioritizing bets and deciding what to work on. And in big corporate organizations, it's an important decision to say, like, how many people are working on a certain topic, because they shift 200 people there and 300 people over there and 500 people over there. And in true agile organizations, that has not been a big problem. But as said, I don't see some of them on that level a lot. And they need different models, right? So they were all on the search for, okay, but how do we organize the work that is not purely delivery on a higher level, and how do we call all these things? And I think Marty just gave that a structure, and he just gave that a word that now because of his reach, because let's face it, his reach is enormous. So because of his reach, he really coined that term, and now people really come and say like, hey, we need a product model transformation. and they finally have a word for what they actually want to do and what they want more of. But but there's so many overlaps, and I think it's so intertwined for people that have done product management and agile working for such a long time. So for me, for example, it's hard to draw the line in the sand where agile would start and product operating model would stop. It's so much intertwined and hand in hand. Where for people that have never really worked in agile environments, they could think the product operating model works without agile, or agile people could think it could work without a product operating model. But I find aspects of both in all organizations. And the smaller an organization is, the lesser you need to draw these lines in the sand. You just work and get work done. The bigger the organizations are, the more structure you need. And then it makes sense to have these words to talk about certain stuff. Yeah.
Fully agree. What always puzzles me is this idea that an organization says, the operating model, awesome. This is exactly what we want, what we needed, and what Agile never delivered. That they have this optimism that a product operating model will be successful in their organization where Agile failed.
Yeah, but Agile didn't fail them. Just the implementation of Agile failed them.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Why do they believe? What's the motivation behind believing that swapping the old model for a new model will now deliver the desired result?
Yeah, that has to do with several things. So first of all, people love new shiny objects, as all of us know. So every once in a while, you want to work on something different. And then what I see at a different client, for example, I had a conversation with a person. She's currently responsible in the digital transformation office for capabilities building. And by training and by experience, she's an agile coach. So she always has been working in the agile coaching environment. And she told me, hey, Petra, finally we have a new word that helps me push the same things. So she's pushing for the exact same things in her organization all of the time. But now that she has a new shiny word for it, executives are listening again, because they somehow already fell numb on this, or can no longer hear agile transformation, because they heard it the last 5 years. They're so tired with the agile transformation. They want to be done with the agile transformation. So now they do the product operating model transformation, right? So I think if we embrace it like that and say like, okay, new name for me pushing the same stuff, then I see kind of not being optimized in our organization. I think that is perfectly fine. So yeah. And the principles are really, if you look at them, so many of them, so many agile books are touching upon the exact same thing. So do product books, but it's really helpful to have a new packaging because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of psychology.
Yeah, it is
becomes
to
a
some extent.
part of this,
Yeah,
new
of
shiny
course.
object things, and the idea of that there are fundamental differences and now it will be good. We're now on the right track.
Yeah, exactly. I drew, I don't know if everybody has the 20 principles in front of them. I drew them some months ago for my newsletter. So I just dropped it in the chat here. Then you can have a look to them. The book talks about more than this 20 principles, but the 20 principles to some extent are a core element of the book. And if you look to them, it's kind of, it's a lot of that stuff is things that Agile is talking about for ages and product as well. And Marty clearly says that, right? I think he pointed it out in the Agile article once again as well.
Imagine you're the emperor of a large organization for a day, and you can change a few things. What to achieve the product operating model, or help it be successful at that organization? What would you typically start with?
Yeah, that really depends on the assessment of what their current problem actually is. What I check first usually. So there is a bottom-up approach that I would go for, and a top-down approach to some extent as well. So I always tend to look at backlogs first, because that tells me a ton about the organization. And what I want to see in the backlogs is that I can get an idea on what they're working on. Not that I need to understand what they actually do, but just that I get an idea what they're roughly working on. And that oftentimes is not the case. So just a few days ago, I did exact this exercise, and it was like, as always, implementing API 2.0, preparing the hackathon. So then it's super hard to understand from a business perspective, what is this team working on, for what target group they're solving a problem. So that's the first thing that I usually do. And by talking to the team, I try to figure out if most of the things that they're working on, not all of them, that's impossible, but most of the things, like 80-ish%, is supporting one or two or three goals that the company currently has, or kind of tries to proceed. And if that is the case, we're good from that end. Oftentimes that's not the case. Then I suggest a small change to the teams, and that is to add a validation column to the task boards, which is a super simple change. But it helps the team to kind of know, like, oh, after we shipped stuff, we go back to the stuff and check if it had an impact. And that can be anecdotes, that can be observing signals. I'm not kind of immediately pushing for hard data tracking, because then you need to implement tracking. And let's face it, that can take ages as well in companies that have not yet been doing it. So it is actually one thing that really helped to have, when you do sprint planning or whatever you call your planning, when you do your planning session, then think about, okay, if this is done, how could we observe if this has improved the problem that we're trying to solve for? So, and observe does it usually. And in some companies, you have proper web tracking, then you can observe it on a dashboard. Sometimes you have to go talk to users, sometime whatever, right? So adoption is an important question. I love the HEART framework from Google for that, because that's basically talking about happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. So this is usually the conversation that I have with my teams, to say, like, hey, if we look at these, can we find signals that people are happy with what we built, that they successfully can complete the tasks that they were about to complete with the thing, that they come back to it and do it again. So there will be the adoption thing, and not turn to the spreadsheet that they love and build over the last 10 years. So all these kind of things. And the validation column really helps for that. What the validation column does as well in organizations that are not so used to thinking in outcomes, so what do we ultimately want to achieve right now, that creates a lot of pressure on the leadership and product level, right? Because then teams want to discuss what the stuff that they launch has an impact, but leadership is not yet discussing this. And so that usually creates a bit of an environment where this can, from a leadership perspective, start to happen as well. So that's actually quite nice with the validation column. And then top to bottom, it's the exact same question. You only can have meaningful goals when you know what you're currently optimizing for. So what is our product strategy? Is it to address a new market? Is it to address one new country, but the others not? Is it to bring out a new product while maintaining the product that we're currently having? So really, this is, what are we saying yes to, and what are we saying no to? Is that something that the organization already has in place? And is it helpful for precisely that? So, because otherwise we're not empowering our teams, right? So teams need to be able to make decisions on behalf of the organization. And therefore, they need guardrails, guidelines, directional clarity. So where are we headed? Why are we headed there? And what are we saying yes to? What's in front of us? And then the other things we say no to. So many things we say no to usually. And that's another thing that I try to find out. Some call that strategy documents, some have written narratives, some have a nice motivational video for their product vision or some. So I don't mind the format, but I want to understand if there's something that helps the teams make decisions on behalf of the organization. Because that's actually, we want to make the users ultimately more successful, and we want to make the organization ultimately more successful, hopefully not only for the shareholders' sake, but also for employees getting a nice salary. But that's just like my personal take. But this is actually why we're here, right? So, and if that is not given, then I know we need to work on this higher level strategic directional clarity bit.
Big fan of an artifact I call the anti-product backlog, just driven from the idea that...
That's a nice idea, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are we not working on?
Yeah.
Could be permanently because it's not aligned with our goals, our
Yes.
vision, our strategy.
Yes.
Just because the second cousin of the divorced third wife of our CEO means that the button needs to be green, we're not going to do that, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Could be a temporarily delayed idea, so not now, but
Not
maybe
yet.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
But it's really helpful,
Yeah.
just visualizing, okay, this is what we're not going to do, and please dig into it. You will find a reason why we decided this way.
Yeah, exactly. Another helpful mental model is that's basically the high level structure that I use for these assessments is Martin Eriksson's decision stack. Because it really helps me to see where there are gaps. And so is there a product vision, or is there a company strategy and a company vision? Does the product vision and product strategy help achieve that? And then are there goals that help us measure if we execute the product strategy so that we get closer to this ideal future strategic product that we're trying to build? And then are the epics that we're currently working on supporting to achieve these goals. I post a blog post here that I wrote about how leaders would use it. So it's a bit of a meta perspective. But that is usually something that I use if I quickly need to assess the directional clarity in an organization.
All of what you described really requires the existence, or at least the desire to create it in the long run of a product culture. How do you help organizations to actually create a strong product culture? And starting from that point, what are the biggest barriers that you typically run into?
Leadership. We're really in a leadership crisis. So it is so often I find leaders that have not yet, and that's not their fault. It's more like the environment is not helpful for that. Understand to its entirety what the role is all about. This leadership role is all about. And then that's tricky. So what I first do, I for example always have this problem: do I take on a new client? Because I don't want to take on a new client where I already know I cannot help them to move closer to a strong product culture, for example, right? It's wasted time and energy, even if they pay me some money for it. But usually it's not in my favor because they're oftentimes unhappy clients and customers in the end, because Petra wasn't helpful. So it is an important thing that I quantify or qualify in the beginning if I think I can help them. And I look for 3 things usually. And I think the same 3 things apply if you're in an internal situation where you want to push for this change. And this is, real quickly, the 3 is pain, urgency, and the awareness that help is available. So I try to find out if they feel some pain that they believe if they would ease that pain internally would make them a better organization. So for example, they see their market share shrinking and competitors taking over. That is a big pain, right? So they can feel in their wallet that they're not making as much money as they have been in the past. That would be a strong driver. And they have realized that that is coming from how they currently pick the opportunities that they work on, for example, their time to market, the development speed, whatever. That's usually just the starting point for the conversation, whatever pain they have identified. So is there pain? Do they really feel the pain? And the important thing is, do they feel the pain as an organization, not as an individual? Because I so often get approached by a really motivated agile coach, digital transformation officer, product person, and they really want to change the organization for the better, but the organization does not want to be changed right now. So the question is it shared pain? And then urgency is another important stuff. So do we need to act now? Do we need to start changing our ways of working now? Because otherwise pain will be bigger, right? And there are 2 important and separate things, because oftentimes companies feel the pain, but they're not yet see the urgency to start to do something about it now. And the last one is, do they acknowledge that there is help available outside of the organization? And they could be in form of a book. I don't mind. That does not necessarily need to be a product coach, or and it can be a training, or it can be just like understanding, okay, we are not the first ones having that problem. others had the problem. There are people that have been working with the others having the problem. So there is experience that we can actually get us in, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So this is usually the 3 things that I'm looking for. And if that is given, then we can start building a stronger product culture or a stronger development culture. Then we only, still a massive task, need to figure out where to start. But that really depends on the organization.
So before we start taking a few questions from the audience, there's a final question I already posted to the
Yes.
chat. It's trivial. We started with a philosophical question and we end with one. So looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of product management and product leadership?
Ooh, that's really a tricky one. So what I see being inspiring to many people right now is the sheer pace in what some of, I would call, the younger generation PMs and POs play with all these AI tools coming out, using them, building products. So I saw so many products coming out of nowhere in a minute, just because week-long hackathons may be a thing of the past. We only need half-day long hackathons now. Teams have like really wild results after really short times of experimentation, and that to some extent really creates, what's a positive word for pressure? In Germany we would say like Anziehungskraft or something like that. So it really creates this positive force for other more established companies, more established structures, to really review the structures and think about their pace and if they could move quicker in one or the other areas. I think that we will see a lot more movement product-wise, right? So more innovative products again, not only just another e-commerce platform. So that's hopefully something that will happen. And it will. I see so many cool products coming out in spaces where it really helps people. So in pharma, in healthcare, for example, healthcare training. So tremendous changes right now, product-wise, development-wise, so that nurses and doctors can train way better before they actually do procedures on patients and stuff like that. So all of that is super amazing, and I think we'll see more of these kind of things. Yeah, let's see. So that's what I'm really excited about. And another thing, but that might be due to my client bias, I see more and more of the corporate organizations jumping onto the, hey, we really want to measure success or real change over progress. Because it's a bit like, are we moving into the right direction, or are we just moving? So is there just movement, or is there real change happening in an organization? And I see more and more of them being really curious about that. So that's, I think, another promising thing, at least for the people in the organization. I feel so many developers, product people, agile coaches have been saying some of these things for ages, and there was a bit of a glass ceiling, and it seems to just breaking up and crumbling a bit. So yeah, hopefully that continues to happen.
Awesome. Petra, that was a lot of fun. Can we steal another 10 minutes of your time?
Of course.
If there are
I still
some
have coffee
questions from the
left.
audience. Oh my goodness. So please, any questions for Petra?
So products in quotes seems to take over the role of agile in quotes, a label that promises to solve everything. For the German-speaking audience, that's the
Yes.
attack of Steiner. And this poses a bit the challenge that product in quotes get watered down to mean everything and
Yes.
nothing. And the real issues cannot be talked about because you don't have words anymore. Yeah, and what's your take on this? Is it worth fighting this kind of meaning inflation that seems to happen all the time, and the bandwagon effect that now everybody who was something with agile now wants to become something with product? And what would be a productive or actionable relationship of product energy?
Yeah, it's really, so I usually call it banner blindness with some of my clients. So that's actually really what happens, right? Because now marketing banners being everywhere, people tend to tune out the marketing banners on the side, and our brains get really good in doing so. There are even studies. I once created a talk on storytelling for product people, because I think that's an important tool in your toolbox to kind of motivate your team and lead your team to be good in talking about what amazing future you want to create, right? And there was actually a study, I don't recall where it actually was from, but they figured out that words are a victim to banner blindness mechanics as well. That's exactly what you talk about, right? Yeah, I try to not use, it's not possible to not use any, but I try to not use too many of the trend terms when I do coaching and I work with people. I always just like describe what we want to achieve more than, so for example, with this validation column thing, I would not say let's add the validation column. I just suggest the change in the planning meeting where we then have the conversation around what actually this feature might be changing or this epic might be changing and how we would actually measure that or observe that change to be successful. And then you can be sure about a clever person on Teams that's like, maybe then we should add a column to our task board that actually keeps track of that. So I try to not to be too prescriptive, and I try to not use all the catchy marketing terms all the time, it's tricky. I think whoever is out there, I had a long conversation with Teresa Torres about that. We've been invited to a conference which is held in Oslo in Norway in autumn. And we both struggle because we massively, it depends people. So I'm not hey, this is the only way of working. And if you not follow my way of working, you're doing it wrong. And Marty has some of that. So he has the kind of, if you're not working 60 hours a week, you're not a product person. That's basically a quote from Inspired. Or if you're not releasing at least one time a week, you're not agile, right? So he has a lot of these kind of things. And I'm not, it's just like not my nature of thinking. It's not, it depends person. So is Teresa. But if you want to write a book, you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. So you have to come up with a definition. So even I, in my book, start with the definition of what is product and what is a product manager. And of course, if I define what a product manager is, then people say like, yeah, but Petra said. So it's basically impossible to talk about something without coining terms and writing definitions. And that's to some extent just the nature of the game. So I would always try to encourage people to break free. So really kind of take the framework, use the framework, break the framework. And the same, I think, would apply for the terms. So where it is helpful for internal marketing purposes, I think, use the term. But as you were saying, Gunnar, it's dangerous because people at some point would tune it out. So use it wisely. And maybe you use it with the executives, but not with the teams. And maybe you don't call it a product model transformation on every slide. Because it's just like, again, it's a lot of the stuff we do is common sense. And yeah, I just would try to start from there. For example, holding a meeting without action items to me is kind of wild. Still, I observe it in many organizations, and it has nothing to do with the product model transformation or an agile transformation that people start to think about actually outcomes of a meeting. Anyways, so yeah, there would be, use it wisely, but I still know you need to use it sometimes.
Thank you.
More questions, happy to take them. Maybe just somebody can share their current biggest challenge or something like that. So did anybody already experience challenges with introducing the product operating model, or Udo, go for it.
Yeah, I was coining the question and your challenge triggered it, yeah. I would call myself a Scrum trainer, best describe myself as an agile coach, being long around, being coaching for about 4 or 5 years before being a practitioner, developing software, also introducing new products to the market, talking to customers 20 years ago, which I draw on now on that experience when I talked with customers directly and debugged with them. So what's going on in my head, and I'm in a big German company moving to the product operating model, a huge company, and I'm kind of driving from an area of 250 people now, that new term, basically advocating what I did before.
See, you're one of them.
I see where my strength lies. And that goes towards also ASE, test automation. I have DevOps experience. I wouldn't call myself a product discovery expert. Certainly, I have old experience sitting beside a user, but I wouldn't call myself an expert. And I wonder, for me and for many people of my fellows, how much do I want to move into really the product domain? I listen to about 40 hours of podcasts. I find it highly enriching, but I'm not a practitioner on that, and I don't have the same authenticity as I have in asking the right questions to a Scrum team, advising them to take the next steps and experiments on their Scrum events. Yeah, what's the root cause? So I wonder what advice or questions you have for somebody thinking, should I now shift me personally and also the people in my organization to go into the product space? Or would it be more a coach topology, yeah? A key domain, or partnering with somebody who is really strong on discovery? We have some good people there, and rather partner with them, find the common interface ground, of course, overlapping as good teams do. What's your take on that? I would be really interested.
Yeah, it really. So I first would start with what, and there are various. It takes a time to answer that question. There are various parts of it. So one part is, what is the company's current challenge, and is doing more of the discovery, for example, can become a competitive advantage to some extent. So are you currently struggling with building stuff that then nobody ends up using or something like that? So if that is a symptom, then oftentimes discovery hasn't been done well enough or something like that, right? So I would not start to look into the discovery because of the sake of discovery. And I bet that you do some of that already, otherwise you wouldn't be in business still, right? So that's usually a good first step, by the way, either to say like, hey, this is the stuff that we already do product discovery wise. We just so far haven't called it that way, because that helps the other ones to understand like, okay, we're not bad. We're just not 100% there, and maybe we don't need to be 100% there, but we already do some discovery initiatives. And discovery for me, just really quickly for everybody that we're on the same line, is really kind of this mitigation of the 4 big risks of software development, right? And that's the viability risk, the business risk. Does it make sense for us as an organization to do what we're actually planning to do, to solve the problems that we're planning to solve? And how do we make that an experiment? For example, we build a business case. Business cases are full of assumptions. They're basically a prototype. And then to some extent, we need to think about how we can put them to test, right? So that is equally a discovery initiative than creating a real prototype and putting it in front of users. That is usually de-risking our usability risk, that people don't get what we actually built. And to some extent, user interviewing could be used to figure out if we deliver the value that the people actually were hoping to get out of the product. That's not the easy one. Value, as that is another risk, and then the tech feasibility. And I bet you don't struggle with the tech feasibility part. That's what naturally comes with your background, right? So that's what discovery is all about. And if you list what your organization already does, and test automation is on the feasibility risk already as well. So you do some of that stuff. Then think about, are we having a problem with figuring out what are the right, most impactful things to work on? Because oftentimes what I find in companies, they do stuff that has an impact, but the question is, could we have 10 times more the impact if we would pick our opportunities to work on a bit wiser? So that would be actually one question. So figure out if there is a problem. And then the question is, do you want to gain more knowledge, or do you personally think you need to build a product discovery skill? Because knowledge can be acquired by listening to podcasts, by going to a training, by kind of reading some blog posts and reading a book. So that's a lot of theory, and that is then what you kind of can inherit. Building a skill is something entirely different, because to build a skill, you need to practice. And can you become good in doing discovery without doing discovery? That's impossible, right? So for you on a leadership level, usually I would not advise to go that deep into building a new skill. but you definitely want to understand what discovery is all about. You want to be able to explain what it is all about. You want to be able to have your take on what it actually is. You want to be able to say, like, is that something that the company should invest and why, to build that skill on the org level. And then you can find you always find these employees that already have a bigger interest in something like discovery or want to run a usability test, or always have these tendencies to build a prototype first, or say, like, we need a A/B test before we do anything else. So I think then it's oftentimes just like finding these individuals and let them do their work and make them shine. And as I wrote a book about communities of practice, I'm a fan of communities of practice. So I really think employees oftentimes, you can get far as an organization by just clever employees talking about what worked in their team and helping each other out. So say, like, hey, we used story mapping from Jeff Patton and it was cool to get visibility on that. And we tried to reset Horace's opportunity solution tree and they sucked in our environment. So we go back to jobs to be done. So I think it makes sense to wrap your head around methodologies and frameworks and people talking about it, and then let the employees do their magic, and then make sure that they exchange what worked and what didn't, but only to an extent, again, that is helpful for the organization. Because maybe there is no problem right now. You're doing enough of it already. And that's the important part, I would say. Is that helpful by any means, Udo?
Yes, especially the later parts, yeah. The one with knowledge and skill I wrote, very detailed, and letting them shine, and what you said around that. And that gives me in the trigger an idea to some questions I have. Thank you.
Yeah, because, and the 4 big risks really help me as well, because whenever they want to run an experiment, because the discovery, that's exactly, so you have an assumption about a user having a problem, or you have an assumption about a user having a problem and you have an idea for a solution, and you want to test that before you actually implement it. You usually do it by running an experiment. And there is this nice book by David J. Bland that I always forget the title. And he listed 38 experiments that one could run to de-risk stuff in software development. I can't find it right now. Maybe I have too many books on my shelf. That might be the case. But I'm sure you can dig it out if you look for David J. Bland. It's a strategizer book. And I think that, for example, is a good idea to learn about, okay, what are these 38 experiments that one could run and when to use which experiment. That's knowledge that you could gain. And then the teams they run the experiments. They try what works in your context and what doesn't. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Petra, thank you so much for spending
so much
time with us.
Best coffee of the week, I'd say.
I'm really glad you enjoyed it. And thank you so much.
You're welcome.